This immediately caught my eye when I saw this. All right, and it's an On3 article. Nebraska legend Tom Osborne calls out college athletics landscape. The NCAA has become somewhat irrelevant. That was a quote. So here's I'm going to kind of go through the article here. When Tom Osborne was Nebraska's head coach, the Cornhuskers reached the highest of highs. Nebraska won 12 Big 8 titles under his watch and 3 national championships. In the time since, Osborne stayed close to the program. He was the Huskers athletic director from 07 to 13 and maintained a presence since Matt Rule took over in 2023. That allowed him to see Nebraska adjust to the new college sports landscape, and he gave a strong assessment of where things stand. Osborne specifically called out the NCAA, which he said is now, and I quote, somewhat irrelevant, end quote. You can quote me, they're completely irrelevant, but I digress. Here we go. In the NIL transfer portal world, he does not believe that they're very relevant. He added the Big Ten and SEC, largely regarded as the top 2 conferences, should step up to help get things back on track. He said, and I quote, I think if those 2 conferences can get together, they may be able to establish some guidelines that make sense. Osborne told KETV, and then the NCAA has become somewhat irrelevant. It doesn't seem to have any clout anymore. There has to be some managing agency with college athletics that can interject some common sense, end quote. Now, the article goes on to say, of course, the Big Ten and SEC have been busy with those discussions. The 2 leagues met last year in Nashville to discuss key issues in college athletics, as well as the college football playoff entry, how it will be altered in the future. They are also preparing to meet February 19th, in just a couple of weeks here in New Orleans, 1 week before the college football playoff commissioners gather in Dallas. Osborne goes on to talk about how competitive balance will be an issue after the House settlement. Okay, but we can come back to that because that's more about what's being spent as far as NIL, things of that nature. It appears there's going to be a cap. Okay, it says under the settlement, schools would be able to share up to $20.5 million directly with athletes, the revenue sharing. Okay, most Power 4 schools expected to share between 15 to 17 million on their football rosters, but I want to come back to that in a minute. The NCAA is reaping what they've sowed. When I was a player, I hated the NCAA. Hate is a strong word. I did because it was obvious the BS. Hey, you can't get a cheeseburger while this guy's making millions of dollars. I've talked about the whole video game thing. Like, I'm on the thing. You're making money off of it. You're making money off my jerseys. It's 90 just because you don't put Carriker on the back like everyone knew it was me, or you knew it was Zach Taylor or Corey Ross or whoever you want to put out there. But yet, we had to document every little thing. We couldn't get any little thing. To be clear, scholarships are worth a lot. My dad looked at me when I was a freshman in high school and said, Adam, we can't afford to pay for your college. You're either going to have to get a scholarship or you're going to have to figure out to pay for it on your own because you are going to college. And I knew from that moment on, those were my options. So a scholarship meant the world to me. But when you think about the equivalency of what these universities have been making for well over a century versus what the athletes were getting, it was not equivalent. It did not make sense. I don't like the chaos that the world is right now in college football. But I never respected the NCAA because they were clearly taking advantage of a situation by keeping us as amateurs. Well, now everything's come full circle. Nobody gives 2 cents to this side of a monkey's rear end about the NCAA, and nobody should. And nobody should have ever respected them. But now, we at least had a governing body, as horrifically horrible a job as they did, that was supposed to be in charge of the better good of the game. Now we don't. Now it's each independent Power 4 conference. We're going to stick with Power 4 because we're going to live in the fairy tale world that there are 4 power conferences, even though there's 2. And all they care about is their conference. They don't care about each other. They don't care about the smaller conferences. I don't know that I blame them. There needs to be somebody in charge, as Coach Osborne said. He basically said the NCAA is irrelevant. Not basically, he did say it. There needs to be somebody in charge who can make college football make a little bit more common sense. Now, the one thing I looked at in here, and Coach Osborne, I mean, he has forgotten more college football, more stuff than I could learn in like 3 lifetimes. But when he's looking to the Big Ten and SEC to kind of be that governing force to bring common sense to college football, I actually see it the opposite. I don't believe that they met last year or they're meeting in February 19th this year to try to figure out what's best for college football. I believe they're trying to figure out, how do we take over college football? How do we create the AFC, NFC model that I've mentioned to Jake a million times last football season? Conference realignment has been pushed off because ESPN re-upped the ACC's TV contract through 2036, which actually infuriates Clemson, Florida State, Miami, because now they're stuck making less money. Now, there is this thing, I forget what it's called, brand something. Basically, they can make more money selling their brand. Well, the instant problem that's going to cause is Georgia, Ohio State, and Michigan and other schools like that are going to be like, hey, they're making more money off their brand, yet we're stuck in our conference deals and we can't make more money than Indiana. So that's going to create more problems down the road. It's a way of the ACC trying to keep their big dogs happy and keep the whole conference together. It's just going to create other issues elsewhere. For me, when I look at the Big Ten and the SEC, what I believe they're really doing is they're really saying, hey, conference realignment ain't over. North Carolina looks pretty good. That's a great brand to bring to the Big Ten or SEC. And eventually they're going to want like 20 to 24 teams. They're going to call them pods, but essentially it's going to be like 4 divisions, six teams in each division. You're going to have your division champs playing each other in the Big Ten. You're going to have some wild card teams, and the Big Ten champs eventually going to meet the SEC champ for the national championship. That is what they want. That is what they are working towards. I don't believe they're actually looking out for the greater good of college football. They're looking out for the greater good of the Big Ten and SEC, and their goals are mutually aligned because they are the two most powerful forces in collegiate sports. And if they're on the same page, I don't want to say there's nothing anybody else can do about it, but they have all the leverage. So I'm curious to see how this plays out. I love Coach Osborne. He did it respectfully, but basically just put it out on the table. Like, the NCAA is irrelevant. College football doesn't make any sense. Somebody needs to step up and do something for the greater good of this sport. So things actually like 2 + 2 = 4, not 58, because that's how the math works right now in college football. The only thing I'm like, I don't know that I'd look to the Big Ten and SEC to do it. He's looking to them because they have the power to do it. I don't think they have the motivation and want to do it. What are your thoughts on all this, Jake?
No, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that's the problem is that at one point you would think that maybe the Big Ten and the SEC could get so big to take, buy that other conference or whatever. But, that would be far down the line. But it's clear that those are the two powers in college football. And I feel like we're just in this waiting zone. Like you said, the ESPN contract 2036, maybe it's a decade away or whatever it might be from just going full Big Ten, SEC conferences. And, who's going to be left out of that? What's that going to be mean for the smaller schools? It's just so messy, right? Because all of it's, a lot of this stuff is quite frankly grandfathered in. If it's moving into a pro model, which we're doing, we talked about it earlier with Texas. They're talking about wanting to move more toward a pro model. Then there's just a lot to figure out because it's, universities make money. They balance their athletic budget off of this for all their other schools. So there's just this giant mess. And you're right. Nebraska, they've always needed a commissioner because at some point I would love to see, like you're saying, let's play regional football because that makes sense within divisions. That's what they do in pro sports leagues. You break them down by region for the most part, and you get back to kind of your regional rivalries and all that. So at some point, I think it is going to go for a circle, and college football will find a good landing spot. But it still feels like we've got a lot of mess to get through before that.
I think it's going to be, because you're right. They will eventually go back regional, but in order to go back to regional, they had to go national to get all the power. You had to have Oregon play Maryland in order for the Big Ten to get this power. The Big Ten teams are making more money despite having 18 teams in our conference. They're dividing the pie up 18 ways. The SEC is dividing it up 16 ways, yet the Big Ten is still making more money because of the wide TV market, which is literally coast to coast. They have to do that in order to get the power. Then they take everybody else's teams, and then they divide it up by region, which actually makes more sense. But by now, the whole Big Ten is across America. So now you can divide it up by regions, but you still got people in Maryland watching people that are like Midwest, maybe West Coast, because they're all in the same conference, and they've been trained to watch this now. So you're not leaving money on the table, but the geographical competition, rivalries actually make a little bit more sense. This is the whole process we're going through. And for me, the Big 12 has a better chance of sticking around than the ACC. But the ACC has a better chance of being competitive in the college football playoff than the Big 12. And here's why. Clemson wants out. Florida State wants out. They're suing the ACC. That's how badly they want out. North Carolina is just kind of hanging out. Whether you realize it or not, Virginia is actually a team that most people want because of the market they're going to bring. Kind of like Rutgers and Maryland weren't brought in for competitive reasons, although Maryland's pretty good at basketball. They were brought in for the DMV, Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia market, the New York market with Rutgers and being there in Jersey. It was TV money. So Virginia's got some decent sports programs, all right? Probably their basketball is probably their best program, decent at football, but it's about the entire state of Virginia and all the eyeballs that would bring and the more money. So the ACC, because of their top-end talent, Florida State, Miami, Clemson, has the ability to compete in the college football playoff, all right, at a higher level than the Big 12. The Big 12 last year had zero top 25 recruiting classes. Zero. This year they had one, TCU at 24. So in the past 2 years, you've had one recruiting class out of 50 spots that landed you in one of those top 25 recruiting classes in each year. Now, the Big 12 has good coaches. They have good development, and they have players who stay around longer. So they still produce good teams. But as far as top-end talent that can compete against the other top-end talent in the country, they're going to struggle in that department way more often than not. So they're always going to have good teams. They're always going to have competitive balance. They're always going to be the most entertaining conference to watch. I'm always going to call them America's Conference. I don't know if they'll ever have a national champion the way it is constructed right now. And I really hope I'm wrong. Like, I'm rooting for Nebraska and then I guess the Big 10, but the Big 12 and ACC to actually have some surprises here. But the ACC outside of their top three, there's not much there, which is why I've said I don't think the ACC is going to stay around forever or even that long. Although I don't want to say they're death sentence, but their ability to stay around was just extended with this TV contract, which actually has made some of their top-end schools unhappy, but that's why they came along. Brand initiative, that's what it was called. Clemson, North Carolina, Florida State, Miami on this brand initiative can now make more money. And that's where I'm like, Georgia and Nebraska and Ohio State are going to look, hey, they're making more money off their brand beyond what their conference is paying them. We want that too. You've solved one tiny problem and opened another can of worms. Does that make sense, Jake?
Oh, yeah.
So for me, we'll see how this plays out. Until, as much as people dislike Roger Goodell, the NFL makes so much money, hand over fist. Good Lord almighty. Did you know that 57.7 million people watched the Chiefs and the Bills AFC Championship game? You know how many people watched our national championship game? Notre Dame, Ohio State, one of the two of the 8 blue bloods in America. You know how many?
Around 20.
22.
Yeah.
The Alabama-Michigan game, semifinal game the year before was 28. Now, you can say Alabama-Michigan, well, Ohio State, Notre Dame. New Year's Day, Rose Bowl, okay, I can understand that. Still not a national championship game. You can blame the extension of the playoffs that just seems to never end. You can blame the fact that it overlaps so much with the NFL playoffs. And even I love college football. It's my favorite sport under God's hot sun. I legit told my wife on Sunday, because the game was Monday night for some stupid reason, let's put it on Saturday, just a thought. It is college football. I go, Ange, don't let me forget to watch the national championship tomorrow. She legit had to remind me. So the timing is awful. But you even go back to 2014, the first national championship game of the college football playoff era. Oregon, Ohio State that year. Okay, Marcus Mariota. Ohio State was starting their third-string quarterback. You had Ezekiel Elliott, all that stuff. Urban Meyer was still with the Buckeyes. That first ever national championship game, 33 million viewers. It's gone down from 33 to 22. That's a 33% drop off. I'm not a math major, but I'm pretty sure that adds up. That's a huge drop off. People are becoming annoyed, disgusted. I should have said annoyed, frustrated, and disgusted just to escalate properly with the way college football is. With people jumping all over the place, it's hard to become a fan of the player because he might be gone in, I was going to say a year, but in 6 months. And I have no problem with them making more money, but it can't just be willy-nilly all the time. Somebody's got to get in charge. Maybe somebody named Adam Carriker. Just throwing it out there. Somebody's got to get in charge that wants the best for college football. I'm just throwing a name out there. It's a random name. No apparent reason.
Get my vote. Get my vote.
I appreciate